So Adam and Eve, the way they deal with it is they immediately reject, right? Before they can be rejected, they assume God is going to reject them. And so they read rejection and withdrawal into the situation, and then reject and withdrawal. They go and hide themselves.
Exactly.
And so you see right...
We were in trouble.
Yeah, right from the get-go.
Right?
There, period. That's exactly what a little child would do. So right there, we see a breakdown in the thalamus. We could be so bold as to say that with Adam and Eve. A breakdown in the thalamus that impacts attachment love, that causes, and we see it in both Adam and Eve, a anxious attachment response and a fearful avoidant attachment response. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Wind Ministries podcast. I'm your co-host, Joshua Hoffert, and I'm joined by the man on the other side of the southern side of North America from the northern side of North America. I'm on, and he is my pops.
Also on. Yes, hello.
Yeah, he is also on. He is here. He is a co-host, Ken Hoffert, to be specific. So welcome to the broadcast podcast, Dad.
What is it? Isn't it a podcast?
Or a broadcast? I guess when you're broadcasting the podcast, so maybe you could call it a prodcast.
Let's not.
No, let's not. Let's not. I invented a new term today, for me anyway. Maybe someone else has invented it. I saw a picture of a revival / church / meeting thing, and the people had unrolled what looked to be about a 50-foot long American flag, and that was part of the meeting. And I saved a picture of it as an American, but also as an American living abroad. You know, Canada is about as close you can get when it comes to living abroad, but it's still abroad.
Yeah.
And looking in at a church service where they've unfurled a 50-foot American flag and everybody's holding a piece of it, and they've stretched it across the whole meeting room. Okay, if you can picture that.
I'm just not going to comment right now.
And I texted a photo of it to my wife, and I said, "This is peak Americanity," and Americanity. So
yeah, I don't think that's going to catch on.
No, could it be Christian? So it's this kind of weird form of Christianity that's enwrapped itself and become totally conflated with the American.
The term has become Christian nationalism.
Yeah, the technical term is Christian nationalism. Yes, and which you know, nationalism is not a bad thing, and Christian nationalism is not necessarily a bad thing either, in the sense of we care about our nation, we care about the godly values being present in the laws of the land, right? Yeah. But it obviously takes on a whole different meaning in a whole different impetus in American Christianity.
Well, yeah, because you have people that try to say it with a sneer.
Yeah,
rather than recognizing that there's value to it.
Yeah, there is. But those kind of displays just make me shake my head as an American living abroad, going, "Come on, guys! When you're having a church service, do you really need to unfurl a 50-foot long flag and proclaim how amazing America is?" It's and you know to be fair, you get the whole the subculture of Christian nationalism of God first chose Israel and then he chose America. Yeah. Right. And that's where I'm going. No, that is not the case. And I think you forgot that there's 2,000 years of chosen countries in the midst of that did horrible atrocities in the name of Christianity. So,
true.
So anyway, I'm just saying I did create a term, but you're right. It might not. Americanity. No, it's probably not catchy enough.
Yeah,
Christian. Doesn't work either.
I wouldn't try to market that one. No.
Yeah.
I don't think it's gonna happen.
I have heard some friends, they put out a documentary a number of years ago. They called it The End of Churchianity. And that was that's a bit of a catchy one, Churchianity. Yeah. Christianity that's just kind of codified by your typical evangelical worship service.
You define your Christianity by your church, right?
Yeah, totally. That's what they meant. Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, but that's not at all. Again, we're not a political podcast, although we've started off the last couple episodes, maybe making maybe we'll get there. Political stuff. Maybe we'll have a whole version of the Wind podcast.
Let's not.
Yeah, let's not. That's right. We'll turn our podcast into reaction videos to politicians. So there's a lot of fodder out there, I'm telling you, though. So,
well, and if we were talking about, because we're going to talk about trauma and pain, and
it really plays in. Actually, it really helps you understand the way.
I was thinking that there was this thing that happened in the U.S. Congress last week where members were yelling at each other and all this kind of stuff, and I'm thinking, well, okay, so we got some breakdown here.
Yes,
of people not getting along, and there's issues that are separating them, and they can't find ways to connect. So, maybe that's true. Part of it.
That's true. Well, I think it is. It's definitely part of it, and I think as we go through these episodes talking about the stages of formation, and we're not saying the stages of formation as they apply to Christian maturity. Yeah. We're talking about the stages of formation as they apply to being a human.
Right.
And the ultimate vocation of the human is to bear the image of God, which is to be human.
Right.
And so we're not necessarily separating Christian ideals from the way a person would mature. And because I don't think you can. I don't think Jesus does. I don't think the Bible does. You're just being human.
We're making them part and parcel of the
We're making them part and parcel of, that's right. Exactly. And
that was a lot of peas in there. Just so
that's right. Well, and like we said, there's a distinction between the kind of emotional maturity we expect from someone who is richly attached to the Father in a deep and profound way, and the kind of emotional maturity we expect from someone who has the right tools and has been given a stable environment to practice them in. Right? There's a different kind of maturity we expect, but there's definitely crossover between the two.
Yeah.
And one of our good friends, Ron Huxley, said at one point in a course that we did, an online seminar we did a couple years ago, he said, there's a big difference between being able to understand how a breathing exercise impacts your level of anxiety and how knowing the Father's perspective impacts your anxiety. So there's a difference between the anxiety that's diminished because you know the Father's perspective and the anxiety that's diminished because you have a breathing exercise. And so we're just working through. We talked earlier in an episode about, can you stumble into emotional health and spiritual health?
Right.
And the resounding answer to that is, well, it seems like you do. It's actually the right set of factors comes into your life. And oftentimes what we see, the result of those factors is the result of the influence of the Spirit of God in your life, bringing the right kind of people around, connecting you to the right kind of healthy community, awakening you to His affection and fondness for you, these kind of things. And we're going to dive even more into that. The last episode we recorded, we talked about the 4 levels of the brain. And in these next few episodes, we're going to dive into each one of those levels. And so this episode is the episode where we'll talk about the attachment center of the brain, which is centrally located in the thalamus. And so when the
thalamus is that interesting little first part of the brain that
develops. Yes. It would be called, would I be right in saying this, Dad? It would be called subcortical.
That's what I've heard it called. Yeah.
Yes, because you have the cortices. Is that the plural for that word? Probably. So it'd be before the
You'd think we'd
cortexes
know all
are.
this if we're talking about the brain.
Yeah. It's the part that's formed before the cortexes are formed or comes into maturity. It's the first part of the brain that really starts developing in the brain of an infant. Right. Now, obviously, when an infant is born, their whole brain is there. It's not like their brain.
Yes,
yeah, they do have a brain, and they have all the parts of the brain, right? But the brain goes through. Yes, so you hope. Yeah, the brain goes through layers of intense formation, and different parts of the brain form at different stages of development. It's just
you might want to say they come online.
They come online. Yeah. They come online,
and more useful, more functional for the things that the brain is doing, that the body's doing.
Yeah, and it's just like, I mean, it's the same as the human body, right? That's why we separate a toddler stage is, an infant is a baby that's a certain age, and why do we separate that into a certain age? Because that's the growth of the body, and then you've got the toddler stage, the terrible twos, all that kind of stuff, right? You've got the toddler stage, and then you have the child stage, because the body of the child is developing in different ways at different ages. There's a baby's legs are short and stubby, and a 9-year-old's legs are not short and stubby anymore, because the legs have grown, that kind of stuff. The brain is doing the same kind of things. And so we can separate the stages of maturity into, and we're going to talk about this more, we can separate the ages of development into different general periods of time, ages for children. So, and we're going to talk more about that in a separate episode, but just so you know, the attachment center of the brain, the thalamus of the brain, is really it's coming online and developing especially in the first 18 months of the child's life. So was it stages 0 to 2, we'll say, to make it easier, instead of
18 months.
18 months. Yeah. So 0 to 24 months, the attachment center is really developing. And the attachment center it's the deepest, but the thalamus, the attachment center, is the deepest part. It's the deepest part of the brain. It's really the most basic guttural thing about you is what the attachment center brings. And it is characterized in its formation by the fondness and the affection a mother would have for their child.
Right.
And so thinking of things like the closeness, like exhibit A, I have 3 children. Yeah. And my wife breastfed the first 2 children. And that was she loved that period of time with the kids and the kind of connection that she had with them because of that, right? Deep affection and deep tenderness between the first 2 children and her. And so that was something that she cherished, and she could feel this really deep spiritual connection with the kids. And then when the 3rd child came along, he had an undiagnosed tongue tie, which is when the bottom part of the tongue is too connected to the lower part of the mouth. And so that was undiagnosed, unrecognized, and he had a hard time breastfeeding.
Right.
And so we went back and forth with the nurses and the doctors and all that, and eventually they realized what was happening. So we had to go have that taken care of, to go to a specialist. It's a little tiny snip, but you need to go to a specialist for it. And by the time that was taken care of, he was born in May, and I think it was early August when it was finally fixed. So what happened was that he could never, when he was trying to nurse, he could never put enough pressure to actually get milk, right? So eventually what happened, for any woman that's listening, what happens is your body adjusts supply and demand to the supply and demand. He can't get the milk. Your body stops producing the milk, and she could never get it back. And so he ended up being bottle fed for most of his life, for most of his growing up years, right? His first 2 years, he was bottle fed. So all that to say, there was a. It's not to say that he didn't receive nurture, affection, and attachment is to say that she recognized the difference between what was happening here and that fondness and affection and what was happening there. And I don't think
the natural flow of it. So you
the
have
natural
to
flow of it.
work
Yes.
on making sure that happens.
Exactly. Now you have to work on a different way of the natural development of the thalamus or the attachment center.
What we might call a rhythm. That establishes. When that rhythm doesn't happen, then you have to find another way to produce it.
And all kinds of,
and there are other ways to produce it.
For sure. All kinds of mothers and fathers struggle with connecting with their kids in those first few years, and especially dads, right? Like the dad is less responsible for the growth and development. We can't. Well, we don't have I can't breastfeed a child, right? I mean, maybe eventually they'll probably discover some way of making men even more women. You hope not, right? So, we're not going to get back into politics. Yeah. So the attachment center is on overdrive. Its development's on overdrive in the 0 to 2 years phase. The thalamus is on overdrive, and the way the thalamus ultimately works is the thalamus is the initial point of contact with reality, basically. So the thalamus is the part of the brain that responds to external stimuli and begins to send what it's seeing, witnessing, experiencing to the rest of the brain.
Yeah.
So if you imagine, as we talked about last time, you have 4 levels to the brain: attachment center, attunement center, fight or flight, and the executive center, right? And so once the thalamus sees something, right? Think the child looking into the eyes of the mom who's breastfeeding it, or the child looking into the ferocious dog that's charging down on it. So the thalamus, or the child that's seeing the dad throw it into the air and catch it, right? So the experience, the external stimuli is channeled through the thalamus, and now it filters what the life model guys would talk about, the elevator of the brain. Right. It comes into the thalamus and it begins to move up through each one of the levels. And so what the thalamus is essentially saying is, because it's the attachment center, what the thalamus is essentially saying is there someone more mature than me, more resourceful than me, who delights in me, even though I can't take care of myself? And so that's the kind of thing the thalamus is, the attachment center of the brain's crying out for.
Right.
In terms of it's just functional reality, it's going, what's happening to me, and how do I send that up to the other levels to process?
And a healthy, and we'll talk about this more as we go along, but a healthy development in those first 18 to 24 months is that this part of the brain that's going to affect every other part of the brain, because it's all connected. That we're learning to live in joy, that joy being looking into the eyes of one who wants to be with me at all times.
Yeah.
We're developing trust, because we have to learn to trust someone.
Right.
We're learning how to receive.
Yeah.
And we're beginning to organize ourselves into a person through our relationships. We're connecting with people, attaching to people.
Right.
And we're learning how to return to joy from all the unpleasant kinds of emotions that we experience as babies. So these are tasks that brain is developing. If it's not developing it correctly, there are ramifications, and there are things that disconnect us. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But those are the things that the brain is, that part of the brain is doing.
Yes.
It actually has a very good function, a very powerful function that affects us through the rest of life, which is why when you say you get into the elevator, that's the ground floor of the elevator.
Yeah.
It's that I can trust.
Yeah.
If I can't trust, I can't even get in the elevator.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yes. And if I can't trust, right, then the attachment center and the rest of the elevator is totally broken down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we don't know which floor we're going to at any point in time.
So thalamus is developing in, its initial stages of development are 0 to 2, and its responsibility as a portion of the brain in a mature individual is to process external stimuli to the rest of the brain.
Right.
And so, and the reason why we call it the attachment center is because it is responsible largely for our attachment level of attachment love.
Yeah.
And so when we're going to talk about attachment theory.
Learning how to attach to people.
Yes.
Other human beings.
And we're going to go through attachment theory in a later episode. But suffice it to say at this point that, brain science, the psychological development of a person, the theory of attachment probably makes the most amount of sense when it comes to how we will relate to each other later in life. So attachment theory basically says you learn ways of attaching through your parental figures and other people that are more resourceful than you that interact with you from a young age. And there are three basic attachment patterns. That's secure attachment, anxious attachment, and then fearful avoidant attachment. Right. And so when it comes to the attachment center, it's called the attachment center because it directly relates to how we attach to others and the way that it processes information. So if the thalamus is responsible for feeding, you can see this very clearly. If the thalamus is responsible for, I see something and now, whether it's a dog, a person, a bottle of milk, whatever, right? My computer in front of me,
right.
It shows me like, for instance, if I had an error message show up while we're recording this, my thalamus would immediately take that stimuli, feed it up to my attunement center, which would feed it to my fight or flight, which would feed it to my executive center. So it's the initial point of contact. And then I would have to figure out, how do I respond to this, right?
Yeah.
So
based on what I already experienced.
What I've already experienced. Now, because when I was younger, I worked in a computer store, and even younger than that, I was very involved in computers and computer building when I was really young. Now, because if I had an error message, my thalamus doesn't go, like some people, right?
Right.
And
when you get the blue screen, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Do we even get those anymore? But anyway, you used to get the blue screen of death.
The BSOD, the blue screen of death. Yeah. That's right. So based on how your brain is developed over time will play a part in how you respond to the external stimuli, because your thalamus goes, I see an error message, right? Mm. What do we do with error messages? Let's send this up to the attunement center. Have we ever seen this before? Right? What happened when we saw this before? Fight or flight? Is this a thing to be concerned about? Do I need to send a signal? Because then the signal goes back down into the hippocampus, which releases cortisol to respond to a stressful situation. Yeah. Right? Have we seen this before? Yes, we have. We know what to do. Executive function. How did we respond in the past? Right? So we go through the stages, and the thalamus is the deepest stage, as the place that either is subformed, malformed, unformed, depending on how, especially depending on how you're treated,
or well-formed,
largely depending on how you're treated as a child, and then what kind of relationships you have around you. Do I have strong, resourceful, emotionally healthy people around me can help develop my thalamus and my attachment center? And so now when a stimuli hits, do I have an initial panic, or do I go, actually, I'm loved, I'm cared for, there's other people more resourceful than me, and I can actually filter the information in a way that's helpful and in a way that invites a good response rather than an anxious or a fearful response. Yeah. So if my thalamus, if my attachment center is well formed, then when I see someone, I see someone who I either recognize or don't know, my initial flash is not one of concern, but of either excitement, curiosity, anything like that, right? So you can see where if a thalamus is unformed or an attachment center is not unformed, but if there is trauma, pain, or wounding, that happened in those stages of life or on a relational level, the pain of rejection, the pain of abandonment, these kind of things stick deep in the brain, and break down the system of processing stimuli. So now I'm stuck in rejection, I'm stuck in abandonment. And the thing that we do when we are confronted then with the pain of abandonment is we tend to externalize it and say, well, it's now that person in front of me, even though they're not related to the pain of the past, are going to abandon me and reject me because I'm used to that. It's my very first response.
I have an anticipation of that.
I have an anticipation of it, right?
And I will see that pattern, whether it's there or not.
Exactly. Yes, right. Exactly.
And then I will respond. And so I create this self-fulfilling pattern.
Yeah, exactly. And
abandonment.
Yeah. And this is why, see, sometimes I think when it comes to church, discipleship, Christianity, all of the above, we wait. Like, I think we have an idea where we're waiting for the fix to come from God. Like, well, he'll fix that relationship as long as I ask him to, and it just doesn't happen, right? And the bad things keep happening. And that's where we talk about, when we talked about stumbling into maturity doesn't happen. You think you may have stumbled, like, well, why did that person mature and that person didn't? Well, there's the right set of factors in their life that produced maturity. Right. And so when it comes to Christian development, if we are waiting for God to fix the situation rather than walking in the Spirit and exploring life-giving opportunities to mature and to develop and to attach to other people that are good, healthy, and will help me grow, rather than just, like, I've had so many people just go, well, I'm just waiting for God to fix the situation, whether it's their broken marriage, whether it's their failing friendships, whether it's their own level of anxiety or fear. They're just waiting for something magical to happen.
So, like, magic Jesus needs to show
up. Yeah, exactly. Right. And when we look at the brain, we're going, well, actually, no, there's a way of walking that God hardwired right into your neurochemistry that will actually help to transform you, that if you know about this, why not just explore it in the first place? And, we have, there's things like, I'm just thinking off the cuff.
But then we're coming back to that issue of trust.
Yeah, we're coming back to that issue of trust. That's right.
Which is one of those things that Thalamus is trying to develop in an early age.
That's right. Exactly. So, Dad, you had said something really interesting, and maybe we could jump into that for a little bit. And it is the experience I think you said to understand the attachment center and in its working and its dysfunctional elements. You don't need to look any further than Cain and Abel.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. So you start with Adam and Eve,
right?
Because they seem to have this healthy attachment to the Creator. Yeah, they walked and talked and all this sort of thing. This is what's described in Genesis. And then you have this introduction of a third party coming in that questions things. So there's doubt. There's this, is it, so the questions are about doubt. Yes. Is it really, is that really the truth? Are these the things that we really need to pay attention to? And
does he really love you? Is he really out for your best interest? Does he really care about you? Issues of trust.
Which is surprising because, Adam and Eve, having no other real experience, as far as we know. I mean, we don't know any, it's just a real short story. Could have been 10,000 years for all we know.
Could have been 1 hour.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so here you have these two that are connected, attached in this sense to the Creator, who then separate themselves out of, so they become disconnected or disattached, unattached from the Creator, and choose to accept something else. Yeah. And in doing so, they stymie the very development, the very growth, the very human aspects of themselves that are supposed to be developing.
And this is where,
they
by the
believe
way,
something.
This is where, by the way, the patristic theology is kind of adds a little bit of insight.
Yeah.
Where some of these early authors, the early church authors, essentially what they had to say about Adam and Eve is Adam and Eve were really in the infant stage of human development.
Right.
When all this happened. That's the Jesus came and showed what it meant to be fully human. Adam and Eve show what it means to be a developing human.
Because and part of the reason that they can say that is we talk about the two trees, right?
Yeah.
One of them being the knowledge of good and evil. And they haven't participated in that knowing good versus evil yet.
Right.
Something that all of us seem to know far too much about.
Yes.
But have a very poor background to really deal with it.
Yeah, that's right.
Coming back to this whole attachment thing, right? Because
we don't
deal with good and evil very well because we don't deal with each other very well.
So Adam and Eve, the way they deal with it is they immediately reject, right? Before they can be rejected. They assume God is going to reject them. And so they read rejection and withdrawal into the situation and then reject and withdrawal. They go and hide themselves.
Exactly.
And so you see
we're in trouble.
Yeah, right from the get-go.
Child would do, right?
That's exactly what a little child would do. So right there, we see a breakdown in the thalamus, if we could be so bold as to say that with Adam and Eve, a breakdown in the thalamus that impacts attachment love, that causes, and we see it in both Adam and Eve, a anxious attachment response and a fearful avoidant attachment response. Right. The secure attachment response would be to go to God the Father and say, we messed up.
Yeah.
That would be a secure attachment response. We messed up. An anxious response says, I don't know what's going to happen. I need to hide. A fearful. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and we can take this concept and just look at the interactions of the Creator with creation, with all humanity.
Yeah.
First of all, with humanity in general, and then humanity specifically as a chosen people.
Yeah.
And over the course of this, how does one party act and how does the other party act?
Right.
One party acts in they come to me, everything is okay. We can work this out. We can find a way to work this out. The other party says, I don't know. I'm not so sure it's going to work out so well. Maybe I need to protect myself. And then we come into that first brother relationship that we get in the scriptures, which is Adam and Eve. Cain and Abel.
Yeah, that's right.
And Abel seems to have some level of relationship that's viable. He seems to be doing things well. Cain, not so much.
Right.
And so much so that this disconnection between the two of them creates violence and then murder.
Yeah, that's right.
So that inability to have this secure attachment, this viable relationship, creates a place of violence.
That's right.
And out of that violence comes murder.
Yeah.
And then out of that murder, you could follow this thing even further forward. Cain, God comes to him, Yahweh comes to him and offers to protect him.
Yeah.
I'll be the one who protects you.
Which is the kind of language that would be healing attachment pain.
Exactly.
That kind of language, right? This is thalamus. This is addressing the formation of the thalamus directly.
Exactly. And what does Cain do? He says he makes this kind of, you can almost see him like juggling this thing here.
Yeah.
And he says, you know what? I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to build a wall. Oh, has any of us ever done that? I'm going to build a wall around my little city that I'm making here, and I'll protect myself because I'm not sure you will.
Right.
So he creates a city.
Right.
Wow. And builds a wall.
Right. Yeah. And
what do we do? We build a wall around ourselves, right?
And you see, well, here's the thing, right? And we could probably explore this topic for ad nauseum, really. You see, you see a secure attachment in Cain, right?
Right.
Where Abel. You see a secure attachment in Abel where he
as far as we know, right?
As far as we know, right? He's content in trusting that what he offers is good enough.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's no question of motive or anything. He just does what's expected of him.
Right.
And this is what you do when you have what's my father expect of me? Okay, well, I believe that he has my best interests at heart. I believe that he loves me. I believe that he cares for me. So I'm going to give what's required to give. Abel, I don't know if he has the best out for me. I don't know if he thinks this. I don't know, right?
Now,
so I'm
now we're talking Cain, not Abel.
No, sorry. Yeah, Cain. Sorry, I keep getting mixed up. Abel, secure. Cain, not. So then he builds walls, right, based on a breakdown in the attachment center, and breaks because of rejection and abandonment in a relational sense. And here's the thing then also is that these kind of attachment styles can be handed down from one generation to the next very easily. And you see in the line of Cain, I think it's 7 generations down, you have Lamech, who says God protected Cain for killing one person. Well, I've killed many people, and nobody can get me. Right. So you've got the style of relational pattern handed down from one generation to the next, which is where I think
then go on to build Nineveh.
I think it is Lamech that does that, right?
Biggest walled city at the time.
Exactly.
Right.
So now you've got it entrenched as a pattern in the family, based on relational abandonment and rejection that breaks down the formation of the thalamus from an infant stage, right? And you've got it proceeding from one generation to the next, which is actually where I think when the Bible says things like the sins of the father will be handed down unto 3 and 4 generations, I really think that's what the Bible's getting at.
There's a pattern that
develops. That's very difficult to break without supernatural intervention.
Yeah.
Someone coming in that demonstrates a whole different pattern of being, which is what Jesus does, right? Jesus at the deepest level
demonstrates to us what it looks like to walk in a love relationship with the Creator.
Yeah, and this is John 15, right? This is where Jesus says, I'm going to quote John 15, 9 and 10. It says, actually, I'm going to quote it in the Passion for those people that I think it really captures it well. I'm not always a fan of the Passion, but there's certain passages that it just evokes really good imagery. He says, I love each of you with the same love that the Father loves me. You must continually let my love nourish your hearts. If you keep my commands, you will live in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands. For I continually live nourished and empowered by his love. Right? My purpose for telling you these things is verse 11, is so that the joy that I experience will fill your hearts with overflowing gladness. So that in the language of Jesus is talking about the deepest place of rejection and abandonment, the deepest place of your being.
Right.
This is attachment language. Come be attached with me, see a different way of being. I will heal your thalamus, in a sense, is what he's saying. And you're going to see things from a totally different perspective. Because we'll talk about the joy center of the brain in a later podcast, in a later episode of the podcast. But you can't have a well-developed joy center with a malnourished thalamus. You can't.
That's true. That's very true.
You have to have
to learn that process of trusting and having joy.
Trusting, receiving, being nourished, being loved, being celebrated.
So that you can create the parts of you that are relational. And
that's right.
Very base of their very core.
When you have a hard time being celebrated and loved, it's probably reflective of a breakdown in your attachment center because of how you were treated as either a young child, young adulthood, or you had a string of broken relationships that created a deep sense of attachment pain. Attachment pain is attachment trauma, especially from a young age, is some of the most difficult. One, it's difficult for people to articulate attachment trauma because it's pre-verbal.
Right.
And so how do you talk about it?
Before within the child, right?
Exactly. So it's pre-verbal before language is developed. So
I don't know how to say anything. I don't know how to describe
when I try and describe it, I'm fail for words because I actually experience this pain before I could articulate what it is.
Right.
And then it crops up in all kinds of ways that I try and relate to people, because as soon as I see them, my thalamus is malnourished, I have attachment pain, I see someone I should attach to, and the immediate response is pain that I can't communicate.
I'm not going to do that because
I'm not going to do that, right?
Right.
And I don't even know, you may call it, some people may call it, well, you need deliverance because you feel something has overwhelmed you. And here you have what we would use in heart sync language. Side note, if you want healing, we offer that as well through the heart sync modality.
Yeah.
Heart sync would say, well, you can't have a cosmic attachment with that layer of attachment trauma.
True.
So there can be spiritual influences there, but what needs to be healed is the attachment pain, which we see experienced in Adam and Eve, transferred down through Cain and Abel, specifically Cain. And then we see Jesus going, well, actually, let me love you at the deepest place of your being so that you receive my gladness. He's talking, that directly relates to brain science.
Right.
And what's interesting flowing from that is that when you start reading the Christian mystics, right, the contemplative authors, which you can go back as far, like you can, in scripture, they'd call Paul a mystic, right? John the Beloved is a mystic. So in terms of the classification of a mystic is not just people that came after the people in scripture, people that had a sense of the divinity permeating their personhood would be probably a way that we could define Christian mysticism, a sense of the divinity of God permeating their personhood. But with that said, I don't think you can find very many of them that would not articulate a profound sense of being loved as one of the initial drawing points in their relationship with God. The contemplative literature is full. I mean, lots of the authors' titles of their books are on the love of God, the fire of the love of God, the divine sweetness, the embrace of the love of God, right? This kind of language permeates the Christian experience, being saturated with the pleasure of God, being saturated with the love of God. And this somehow creates a whole new way of being for these men and women. And so it's interesting when you start thinking about relationship wounding and rejection at the deepest level that forms the brain, and that when God comes and reveals himself in a supernatural, or basically when I say supernatural, I mean greater than expected within the natural means, in that kind of way, the change of disposition in the person is astronomical,
right,
to say the least.
Right. But if I were so I think if I could say this correctly,
yeah,
if I am having a hard time connecting to humans, and therefore probably a hard time connecting with the Creator, then I'm going to have a difficult time seeing love in any capacity.
Yeah.
I'm going to distrust love.
Yeah.
More than likely, because love has that as a basic free-flowing component, the ability to connect one to another.
Yeah.
But if I'm having a hard time doing that, and I have some of this, as you said, some pre-lingual, pre-verbal pain that gets in the way, and it's like a big, it's like this roadblock here.
Yeah.
That says, no, you need to turn left or right, and you can't go straight on ahead. If I have that, then I'm going to keep missing that ability to connect both to other human beings and then to God. And I won't see God as loving.
Yeah, that's right.
I will see God as somebody I can't, something I can't trust, or someone I can't trust.
Yeah. And with that said, I think God does have a unique way of either putting people in our path that demonstrate a kind of trustful love,
right,
that begins to heal those broken places, right? Like where they can put up with our junk and our rejection and start to love us. Like I remember one guy saying, love the orphan out of you, right? Like deep thalamus wound, we would call an orphan spirit would be the kind of language we might use for that as well.
Yeah, that's
the person has a sense of abandonment, right? That lingers with them through adulthood. A lot of times that has to do with how you were loved when you were young. But God has this unique way of either bringing someone along that demonstrates this kind of deep nurture and care and affection, or himself breaking in beyond your woundedness and revealing himself as a God who loves, cherishes, and cares for you.
Yeah,
and so he has this unique way of bringing
the lie,
yes,
the deception that happened very early on.
That's right. Yeah,
and into something that's true. And so, would you say that? Because I think that this is probably core to it, is that that healthy community is a foundational place to begin to develop this sort of a new connection.
Yes.
Healthy community. I mean,
yes,
very healthy.
So let me say this. Yes, absolutely. Let me say this though. The issue isn't, and I just want to, I'm not trying to correct something you said. I just want to bring clarity to it. Yeah. The issue isn't that God is addressing a lie, because sometimes we get binary, right? So we get so binary in how we hate that, right?
Yeah.
It's that the lie that you believe is the twisted way you've learned to perceive reality. Right. So that's what deception is. I've learned to perceive reality in a way that's not reflective of how it really is. Right. Yeah. This person in front of me could be a deep, loving person, but when I see them through the lens of abandonment and rejection. So I don't perceive reality as it is, because I believe what I believe about the world is false. It's a lie. But the issue isn't addressing, and this is something that has to be said for people, because people think I need to address the lie. No, the lie isn't what you need to address. The lie is the result of a wound, which is either, we'll talk about different types of trauma too, so just bear with us on this whole thing. A wound of neglect, a wound of intent where someone intentionally harmed you. Now I have something of pain that I'm carrying. I have to learn how to address that. And so my perception alters because of the pain. And so when I'm trying to deal with a lie, it's like I'm cutting the branches off of the tree, but never dealing with the tree itself. And so
not a rational lie versus truth.
Exactly.
But a relational wounding.
Yes.
That needs to somehow be set right.
Yes.
So that I can then see the world the way that it's supposed to be seen.
Exactly. So I could expose the lie and try and believe the truth all I want.
Yeah.
If I have if I have a malnourished thalamus and my attachment center is broken, I'll still have a hard time connecting with people in my community.
Well, yeah, because don't people get set?
And that's the very thing I would need to be healed.
I think people get told sometimes, I told you what was true. Why don't you just believe it?
Yeah.
Well, I can't.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's so much misunderstanding on this, and then more pain because of it. So anyway, I'm done.
Right. Yeah. Well, with that said, Dad, I think we need to wrap up this episode, and there's lots we could say about without going too much further into the infant stage of development and attachment theory. Those are all things we're going to cover more completely. But suffice it to say, your thalamus, when your attachment center is underdeveloped, it can lead to all kinds of pain in relationships later. When it's really well developed, it tends to lean towards trusting, healthy, integrated people in their community.
Yes.
And those things can be hurt in childhood. They can be healed in adulthood. They can be hurt in adulthood and healed in adulthood too. Yeah. And so when we're thinking through the formation of a person, we have to take into account how we love and how we're loved and how we let ourselves be loved. And we can see in the story of Scripture all those things taking place.
Right.
So
it's an amazing story, actually.
It really is. It really is. So with that said, everybody, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us on the journey. And we will be talking more about the Attunement Center next week. And the amygdala, I think, is what we're going to be diving into. Yes.
I always like that.
Both part of the limbic system, but your brain.
I don't like to say thalamus, but I like to say
There we go. So maybe my dad will have more to say next episode. Yeah. So without further ado, thanks so much everybody for tuning in. Until next week, God bless.